What are the toughest weapons to get in Grounded? What are the easiest? I'm giving you my progression today, especially for new Grounded players, Game Pass core players. This is a little guide to give you a heads up about what you should be aiming for and when's the right time to focus on a weapon or not. It's very opinion based, but with over 1,000 hours in the game, hundreds of guides under my belt and millions of views, I think I'm better equipped than some people to help you along the way. Expect massive spoilers obviously as I list in progression order all the different weapons in Grounded, and obviously yeah, it is just my playthrough. Everyone's going to have a different type of game, whether or not they're playing with others and just where they are in the yard, so take it with a pinch of salt. But here you go, here's my guide with some top tips. And do please leave a like if you find this video useful. Let's go. So leaving 2 spaces for the pinch whacker and the prod smacker. This is the order that I think you should probably get your weapons, or where you should expect to be. Perilous Spear, Sprig Bow, Lava Blade, Red Ant Club and the Spiky Sprig, they're all very achievable in getting in the early couple of days of Grounded. Whether or not you've picked up the rotten versions or you've just crafted them, these are the basic weapons and it's all just about getting used to them and finding out your style. The hardest part in terms of bug parts to get are probably from a ant soldier, with the rest relatively being easy to craft out of natural resources. And yeah, you can even get the rotten ant club pretty much on day 1. So it is the first tier 2 weapon that you should be able to get relatively easy. Now the Pebblet Dagger isn't hard to get, but it is in the pond, and there's a lot of areas that you'll probably be exploring before really having to go into the pond. So that's why I've placed it ahead of some of these, even though the actual requirements for it are much easier. Then Mosquito Needle and the Stinger Spear, taking care of some of the airborne creatures in Grounded. They can be tricky, no doubt about it, but yeah, not relatively that hard as long as you've got a slightly upgraded bow and maybe using the right arrows. And even easier now with the block stun that you can do on most flying creatures. Followed by the Pinch Whacker. You only need a 1 bomb to actually access this place. Opposite the Squirt's milk carton, just by where all the roses are, against that flower bed wall, you'll find the Berry Lab. So it will be the earliest tier 3 weapon that you can get hold of by a mile. That's why it's so good to get this. After that, an insect bow. You should be more than ready to take on lots of wolf spiders. With that, you should also be able to take care of the Spider Fang Dagger. And I've put the Bone Trident and the Bone Dagger a little bit higher. You do need Diamond Bell spider chunks to make these. I don't think they're necessarily harder than wolf spiders, but given that you're underwater fighting them, you've also got Trudy moving around, that makes it slightly harder to get. After that, it's getting enough crow pieces to make the crossbow, and then heading all the way over to the Black Ant Hill to get the Black Ant Sword. By the time you've done that, you're exploring the sandbox to get the Antlion Sword, and then you start your adventures in the upper yard, where it's a real mix and toss up between which one of these you might get. Obviously the recipe for the Salt Morningstar you should have got in the sandbox when you got the Antlion stuff. Top tip with this by now, of course, is you don't have to wait until you get the Assistant Manager keycard to get the clue about where to find the key. It should be pretty much at the spot just where the spade might hit at 2 o'clock in the day, and just make sure you bring a tier 2 ant shovel with you and you should be able to dig it up. You then obviously open up the mossy chest and you've got the recipe for the Salt Mace. And the Mint Mace you might have got even earlier, completing the picnic. Of course, you simply have to go and get the key, which is obviously in the exposed pipe just below the picnic table, and then picking up the chip that'll have the recipe that you can then go ahead and buy from Burgle. So it's relatively easy to get, but to craft it you do need that tough gunk. So you only really start getting that once you get to the upper yard and you've got the Spicy Sultana sitting there. Now the Spicy Sultana does have that added extra hardness from taking it from the recipe of the charcoal bag and defeating lots of the ladybird larvae. But with a good spear, maybe upgraded to fresh, it shouldn't be a problem. There is an argument that you should wait until you get the rusty spear unlocked first before taking this on, but it does mean that you're going to have to wait until you get your tier 3 hammer so that you can go ahead and get the rust pieces. And you're probably not making that tier 3 hammer until you've killed a whole bunch of Black Oxes, and that's naturally where the Black Ox crossbow would fit. So for that reason alone, because you do need the tier 3 hammer to get the rusty spear is a bit higher. But once you've got the tier 3 hammer, the rusty spear is much easier and quicker to craft than any of these other weapons. Now you've got your Spicy Sultana, you take on the Broodmother. Of course you do need the summoning recipe, which you obviously find in the observation tower just outside the Broken Hedge Lab. Then over to the lair near the disc in the hedge. Although a Spicy Antlion Sword is just as good. Then over to the Termite Hill to go and get yourself the staves by taking care of the Termite King. I had a last minute change with the staves as I realised that obviously the fresh one and the spicy one are relatively easy to get. You just need fire ant mandibles to craft the spicy and some crow feather pieces to make the mint staff. But the sour one, you do need that pond moss. And since you only get that from some light drops from killing some of the spiny water fleas until you get the Black Widow dagger, it definitely is a bit harder. So Fire Ant Club should be no problem since you've got enough fire mandibles now. And yep, if you're thinking about getting pond moss, you probably took a trip up over to the stump or to the upper pond and taken care of some tiger mosquitoes. So this is relatively easier to get. For sure, I think even the sour staff could be put up even higher. All just depends if you got lucky killing any spiny water fleas, as it's only about a 1% drop of getting pond moss by killing these guys. Ticks are just annoying, but you do need 10 of the fangs to go ahead and make it. There's maybe an argument that it could be made a little bit earlier than some of the others, but I just find them pretty annoying to go and hunt down. And a toenail scimitar is pretty tough because you have to go to all the different locations. Especially if you've crafted the concoction you need to grow big, then you might need to wait for some of these to respawn before crafting this. And after this, it's all about bosses or some of the toughest creatures in the game. Shmeta is obviously part of Moldok's castle. It's more or less an upgraded assistant manager fight. So overall, I view that as an easier fight than maybe the Mantis, given you can't fight the Mantis until you've obviously defeated the Broodmother as well. No boss fight is really that easy in Grounded. They're all pretty tough in their own way depending on your skill level and what kind of gear you got, but the Mantis isn't as bad as it seems compared to when it first released and against the other bosses. The Woz Queen is pretty tough to fight. I definitely wouldn't recommend it until you've maybe done the Mantis, but I would actually rate killing a whole bunch of Black Widows as more of a tougher fight than taking on the Woz Queen. Controversial, I know. As long as you've got a good bow, either the tier 2 one max upgraded, and you've made some of the Wasp armor the full set, so you've got the air superiority and salt arrows, then it's not too bad a boss fight, especially when you've got plenty of heals. Whereas Black Widow, yeah, having to go through all the different locations, coming up against other creatures along the way, I just think it's overall tougher. I then include the Prod Smacker because you can't get it until you've completed all the mixers. So yeah, the upper yards mixers particularly are really challenging. They're not going to be able to do them without erecting some sort of defences and making sure you've got actual good gear. Once that's done, it's easy enough picking it up from the Black Ant laboratory in the secret door that you couldn't open, and it's just probably not worth your time as a two-handed holding down charge weapon just simply isn't it in Grounded. And then of course the Blast of the Mouldy Matriarch, absolutely the toughest weapon that you can find in Grounded to get, having to defeat the infected Broodmother a whole bunch of times to get enough pieces. Designed specifically for the parry pros of Grounded, not just for any random player, only the ones that have really mastered the art of combat. It's a great weapon, it's not the best weapon. If only it could actually destroy all tier 3 resources, it would make it really worthwhile actually trying to take on the infected Broodmother. But there are some stuff that it just doesn't blow up. Last note of caution or top tip is you won't have enough upgrade materials to max out level 9 of all these weapons unless you're going to do some serious farming of the wolf spiders and basically crafting as many of the supreme and sturdy upgrades you need. So generally only go up to level 5 with a weapon you're not too sure about in terms of upgrades. You should have plenty enough for that at least, but never go past that unless you're really committed to that weapon. By the end of your playthrough, if you're not going to do extensive farming, you should have enough materials to upgrade maybe 3 or 4, possibly even 5 upgrade weapons to level 9. And that's with like an average amount of killing wolf spiders and more. 9 times out of 10, it's usually better to go down the mighty path, as so many of the weapons, their mutations that you get or the elemental damage types, it doesn't really add as much as you would think, so it's definitely worth checking out any wikis to see if there's any hidden stats. Although of course there are exceptions with certain things like the rusty spear, which is always best with having fresh on it, taking care of all the fresh enemies that are also weak to spears up in the upper yard. I'll dive more into that kind of stuff though in a new video. So do you agree me or disagree me about my list? What did you find the best weapon you came across in your playthrough Grounded? What are you really enjoying? Or what do you like the sound of now you've heard more about some of these weapons? As always, Ratbags, I will see you for more guides and gameplay. Until then, laters.